All right. Good to see everybody. Looking wonderful. Today, this is Believing Lesson 4. And I'm going to title this, The Art of Forgiveness. And I asked Josephine what makes a good painting or a good photograph. And she said, a good picture makes me want to jump into the scene. It makes me want to be there. I want to go in and look around. See, just like art invites us to participate in the subject of the artist, believing invites us to participate in our own life. Forgiveness composes a setting so we can focus on the subject and feel the artist's intent. And so the art of the heart. And I looked up what great artists and photographers of our day said make great pieces of art. And some showed images of what was done by the masters of days gone by and described why the paintings or pictures should speak to our soul. And others described the thought process of producing art. And so out of all this, I came up with 3 basic steps that they all seem to say with different words in order to make a piece of compelling art. And number 1 is focal point. Number 2, composition. And number 3, effect. I was reading, of course, we've all enjoyed through the years the National Geographic magazine, and this is the photo issue, and they've done many incredible photos through the years. It didn't start off that way. It was just a periodical with no pictures way back in the day. But here is a quote by somebody. It says, "In the field, I've seen some of my lens-toting compatriots sit for days, even weeks, with their subjects, just listening to them, learning what it is they have to teach the world before at last lifting the camera to the eye. Our photographers have spent literally years immersed in the sequestered worlds of," and then it goes on to talk about the reindeer or the Japanese geisha or New Guinea birds of paradise. But they may spend months and months or weeks or even years studying the subject before they ever lift a camera to the eye. That's art. And forgiveness is an art. You know, focal point. The focal point tells the eye where to go first. It directs the eye to the subject. Composition controls the setting to highlight the subject. And the effect is what holds our attention and speaks to our soul. So I found it fascinating as I was studying this that not one of the pros mentioned the tools of their trade as being significant in the art process. And it wasn't the brushes, the paints, or the fancy camera or the camera equipment that make a great art. It's capturing the heart, the vision, and the intent of the artist. So now we're going to talk about focal point. And we're going to be in Luke 17. Focal point. Now, focal point, again, tells the eye where to go first. It directs the eye to the subject. Every good piece of art has an intended focal point. Every good piece of writing has a focal point. A lot of you have seen the famous painting by Johann Vermeer, The Girl with a Pearl Earring. And it's captivating, her intimate stare, looking over her shoulder. It draws you in, and then your eyes go down to what's dangling from her ear, the pearl. See, eyes are attracted to light. And Luke 17, we're going to read verses 5 and 6 from the King James. "And the apostles said unto the Lord, increase our faith," or increase our believing or conviction. And the Lord said, if ye had faith or believing as a grain of mustard seed, ye might say to this sycamine tree, be thou plucked up by the roots, and be thou planted into the sea, and it should obey you. Now, what is that section that I just read talking about? What's the focal point? Anybody? Believing. It seems to gush with believing. And what is believing? Believing is a total conviction. Believing is being totally convinced of the impending conclusion. It's an unwavering view of an intended outcome. To believe is to see what will absolutely be the finished product long before it exists. Don't turn there, but I'm going to read Hebrews 11:1 from different translations. The Lexham English Bible says, now faith is the realization of what is hoped for, the proof of things not seen. The New Living Translation says, what is faith? It's the confident assurance that what we hope for is going to happen. It's the evidence of things we cannot yet see. And the Amplified, now faith is the assurance, the confirmation, the title deed of things we hope for, being the proof of things we do not see and the conviction of their reality. Faith perceiving as real fact what is not revealed to the senses. So put those together. Believing is just absolutely knowing you're going to have what you envision. It's not maybe. It is absolutely going to happen. Anything less is not believing. See, our reality was conceived when we believed. Now, in 1501, a 26-year-old artist named Michelangelo picked up where a few others had left off. And because he did such an excellent job carving the Pietà, it's a sculpture of Mary holding the limp body of Christ across her lap. And he was given the commission to sculpt a mammoth image of David. And now 2 other sculptors had worked on this project and were both fired or just quit. And one got as far as roughing out the legs, but it was still basically a 17-foot long, multi-ton block of marble. And by the time Michelangelo got the commission, this 6-ton block of marble lay exposed to the elements in an open courtyard for 34 years. Untouched, partially chiseled. An embarrassment to Italy. And this exposure to the elements made it softer, and Michelangelo knew it was going to make it harder to work on, but that's what they told him to use, the people who contracted him. PBS said, quote, Michelangelo is a painter, a sculptor, and architect. In this era, all 3 forms of art are thought to be based on disegno, an artistic discipline on knowledge of the male human form. Sculpture is considered the finest art form because it mimics divine creation. And the sculptural image found within the block of stone, much as the human soul, is found within the human body, or in the physical body. End of quote. I'll read that again. The sculptural image is found within the block of stone, much as a human soul is found within the physical body. Now we're talking about believing here. It's seeing something that doesn't exist, like it already exists. And that's what this section seems to be saying. But just wait. See, there had been other sculptors who carved statues of David. A couple of them very famous as well. But Michelangelo's is by far the most famous. And Michelangelo could visualize his personal version of David before he ever set chisel to stone. See, he didn't carve him holding the head of Goliath like the other guys did post-battle. He carved him to show the human emotion of David just before he was going to run into battle against Goliath. And that is the face of the famous sculpture David. So now we're going to talk about composition. The next step in producing art is composition. Now, composition controls a setting in order to highlight the subject. You know, as much as I love teaching about believing, and is believing really the subject of this section? And the context is going to be the composition. And you're going to find this quite revealing. Because I've taught that. I've used those two verses we just read hundreds of times and just taught believing. But now we're going to see what the real focal point Jesus was trying to make is. And this will help us with that believing, with our believing. So Luke 17, verse 1. This is from the Message. And he said to his disciples, hard trials and temptations are bound to come, but too bad for whoever brings them on. Better to wear a millstone necklace and take a swim in the deep blue sea than to give one of these dear little ones a hard time. I think, be ready because you're going to get attacked. Now, he's preparing his disciples for something. Here's the setup. Then he says in verse 3, be alert. If you see your friend going wrong, correct him. If he responds, forgive him. Even if it's personal against you and repeated 7 times through the day, and 7 times he says, I'm sorry, I won't do it again, forgive him. Now, is that easy to do? No. No, it's not. And there had to be a reason he was teaching these apostles and these disciples this stuff. It had to be something they were struggling with. And I'll show you in just a moment. You know, what if the attacker is that close to you, a friend or family? What do you do then? If he says he's sorry, you forgive him each and every time. Why? Why? You know, forgiveness is hard. It's something hard to give. Here's a quote. The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong. Mahatma Gandhi. See, every single major religion talks about forgiveness, and it's one of their most firm tenets. Only Islam talks about retribution, and that's to the outsiders. But it's built into every single religion. It's got to be huge. It's godly, it's true, and it's eternal. It always has been, and it always will be. We're glad God's a forgiving God. Yet many times we don't want to forgive because we got hurt. Mark Twain said, forgiveness is the fragrance, the violets. Forgiveness is a fragrance the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. That's Mark Twain. Forgiveness is the fragrance the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. Mark Twain. You know, I mean, you're not going to leave a stink. You're going to leave something good. Forgiveness is an incredibly powerful tool. In verse 5, and the apostles came up and said to the master, give us more faith. And here's what we read earlier. And they basically said, Jesus, you got to help us with this one. You know, how are we supposed to do this forgiveness thing? I mean, now look at the context. The context is, if you get burned by your friends, what are you supposed to do? You forgive them. And then they said, hey, you know, we need a little more believing here. We need a little more information on this. Need a little help here, Jesus. Now we're in Matthew, or should I say Luke 17, and we're at verse 6. And but the master said, you don't need more faith. There is no more or less faith. If you have a bare kernel of faith, say the size of a poppy seed or mustard seed, you could say to this sycamore tree, jump in the lake, and it would do it. So now what's turning into the focal point of this whole section? Forgiveness. But what's tied in with forgiveness? Believing. And so this is the true focus of this. And it's believing, or is it forgiveness, or is it something else? And for years, all I saw here was verses 5 and 6. Because a lot of times you just pull out of the Gospels what you want. But the context here is bigger. It's because as humans, you'll never be able to fully believe if you can't fully forgive. It's a limiting factor. And it's hard to do. It's hard. It was even hard for the apostles. See, believing's surely there, but it's in the context of some other thought. It directs our eyes and our minds to the real subject. An example I used was art. You have to have a focal point in a piece of art, like the one behind me. What the focal point is really the stones there, and everything goes towards that. The center, even the clouds go toward that. Photographer might have waited for days for something like that. You see, it has a focal point. And then the composition. Everything pulls your eye to the center of this thing. Any good piece of art does that. There'll always be something that stands out in a piece of art. And so those are the first two of 3 points that I made. And so I love how the translator interpreted it to say there is no more or less faith or believing. And we always use the term, okay, you got to believe, you're a big believer, or I need to believe bigger for this car, for this job, or for this thing. But think of believing as a light switch. It's on or it's off. It's the image that you're making. It's the image that you're painting. It's the sculpture that you're carving, really, that helps you set that believing. The more clear that is, the better that image is, the more clear you're going to get what you want. It's either on or it's off. Either you're believing or it's not. A small speck, Jesus said, if you had a speck of believing, like a flake of pepper, you could say to that tree right out there, get lost and go jump in the lake, and it would have to. That's how big an example of how believing can be. It's huge. But the context here is how to believe to forgive, or how forgiveness can help you believe. It works both ways. And so, maybe we can think of believing as, remember, it's like that light switch. It's on or off. If you believe, you will receive. It's the composition that determines the effect. Composition, think of composition as how you decorate your house. It's how you arrange your furniture, or the colors you paint your wall. And some people pay a lot of money to people called stagers before they sell their house. And this person will move your stuff around. It'll tell you to get a storage shed to move a lot of your junk out of there. And they'll set your house up so that it highlights the beautiful parts of your house so people want to buy it. So you can make more money than if you just had, all your pictures of your cats on the wall or whatever you're into. And so now we're going to go to the effect. This is where everything leads to. This is the intended purpose of all art. Is the effect. How does it make you feel? That song. Song can be art. I had a boss once when I worked as a tool and die apprentice. And this boss, one day he would play classical music all day long. Another day he'd play like hard rock, like acid rock. And this is in this big factory. And we're all listening to this. And so one day I asked him, I said, why do you switch the music up like this? Why do you play classical or rock or easy listening? He said, when I play classical, I get the best work out of people, but they do it slower. But the workout, when I need accuracy, I play classical. When I need you just to pump out that work and get it done without regard to accuracy, I play rock. And the harder and heavier, the better. It's just a psychology. You've seen a driving rock song, and next thing you know, you're going 90 on the highway. It affects you. That's art. It affected you emotionally. That's the effect. It holds our attention and speaks to our soul. And that's the intent of every section of Scripture. What's the intent of Jesus Christ here in these few verses? What is the intent? Where is he trying to bring the apostles? And where is God trying to bring us with this? You know, what was Jesus really trying to convey here? See, the effect of art is visible yet timeless. Believing is visualized and also timeless. You know, was this intended? You know, what was this intended lesson to his closest of followers, the apostles? I mean, these are the guys, they camped out night after night. They went up and down Israel, from Jerusalem all the way up to the Syrian border, time and again, time and again. He's on his way back at this time from, you know, he's in Galilee. He's heading back to Jerusalem. This is more than a half a year in. He'd been with these guys. They'd seen people, they'd seen spirits cast out. They'd seen people healed. They'd seen him get hammered at almost every single meeting. They'd seen their own friends turn on him. They'd seen Jesus' mother and brothers try to get him out of a meeting one time because they thought he was crazy. That's even in the Bible. Mary thought her son was a nut job just for one moment because that was what people were saying. You say stuff enough, people believe it. She changed, of course, and so did his brothers. But I mean, it's amazing what popular opinion will do. That's the effect of words. They move people. It's the effect of pictures. It moves you, or music, or sculpture. In what way does the context or composition direct us to the ultimate focal point here? And before we can really understand this, we got to read this whole section in one unit, and I think you'll see what I'm talking about. It takes this entire look at this masterpiece that Jesus said in 10 verses to see, and just see where your eyes or your heart takes you when we read it through. So Luke 17, this is from the Amplified, verse 1. And Jesus said to his disciples, temptations, snares, and traps set to entice to sin are sure to come, but woe to him by or through whom they come, the cause. It would be more profitable for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were hurled into the sea, than that he should cause to sin or be a snare to one of these little ones, lowly in rank or influence. Now I have to comment here. This is the desired effect. Now this is Jesus talking. And he's saying it would be better for that guy to have a rock tied around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea than for him to hurt you, than for them to hurt you. Remember we talked last week about Jesus as being the ultimate predator against evil. I mean, he attacked evil. And that's that's in a sense what this is saying. And you don't allow that. But we're going to learn how not to. Verse 3, pay attention and always be on your guard, looking out for one another. If your brother sins, misses the mark, solemnly tell him so and reprove him. If he repents, feels sorry for having sinned, forgive him. And even if he sins against you 7 times in a day and turns to you seven times and says, I repent, I'm sorry, you must forgive him. Give up resentment and consider the offense as recalled and annulled. Just let it go. And I was thinking forgiveness is the opposite of believing. And allow me to explain. To believe, we visualize that we already have what we want before we ever see it. That's believing. To forgive, we stop visualizing what has already happened to us. Both release the best in us and for us. One you believe to hang on to, one you believe to let go. Both take believing. The apostle said to the Lord, increase our faith, that trust and confidence that spring from our belief in God. They said they needed help believing this because they were getting hammered. You got to understand, like we're doing a meeting in this studio. A lot of people listen to us online and such. But imagine if every time you did a meeting, there was a group of people that came in and just tried to hammer you. And they tried to shut you down. They challenged everything you said. That was how Jesus Christ had to teach many times. Even his disciples sometimes would challenge him. And as we get closer to the time where he lays down his life, we'll see this happen more and more and more. You get cocky. They'd been with Jesus Christ for a long time. We have to be careful just because we've called ourselves Christians for a long time that we think we know it all and we understand it all. We don't. I thought this section was teaching believing, but it's really teaching more. And we'll keep reading here. Just think about where your mind's taking you now. Okay, now the apostle said to the Lord, verse 5 again, increase our faith, that trust and that confidence that springs from our belief in God. And the Lord answered, if you had faith, trust and confidence in God, even so small like a grain of mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, be pulled up by the roots and be planted in the sea, and it would obey you. Now, almost everybody at some point has tried to pull a tree out by hand, even a small tree. It's not that easy. Many times, many trees will have a root system that spreads out as far as the leaves. And sometimes they'll go as deep as the tree is high, depending on soil type and tree. It can be an incredible root system. And so for him to say, if you just had a speck of believing, you could just say to that tree, get up and go, and it's going to go. It's going to uproot itself. Now, of course, this is figurative, but the figurative ties to a truth here. That's how big believing is. If you can visualize it, you can receive it. It's really that simple. But, let me keep going here. Will any man, now here we go. Now we're going to go to something we haven't read yet. Will any man of you who has a servant plowing or tending sheep say to him when he comes in from the field, come at once and take your place at the table? Are you going to serve one of your servants? Will he not instead tell him, get my supper ready and gird yourself and serve me while I eat and drink, then afterward you yourself shall eat and drink? Remember, this is Jesus saying this stuff. Is he grateful and does he praise his servant because he did what he was ordered to do? Even so on your part, when you have something done, when you have done everything that was assigned and commanded you, say, we are unworthy servants, possessing no merit, for we have not gone beyond our obligation. We have merely done what was our duty to do. Now I thought, how does that tie into that whole section? How does it tie in? We're talking about forgiveness. We're talking about believing. Now he's talking about an unprofitable servant. Well, it's the attitude. I mean, no employer is ever going to say, oh, please, come on in. You've been working all day. Here, sit down. Here's some food. It sounds good. But at that day and time, no employer would ever do that. If he's your servant, he's your bond slave, so to speak, he's going to feed you. Then when you're done, then he'll go, even though he's been working all day. And that's just what he signed on for. He's just doing exactly what is required of him. To us, it might seem unusual, but to these people, it was totally normal. Of course, you would have him do that. He would serve you first. Of course he would. And so he's just merely doing what was asked of him to do. See, if you want to build your belief and to be able to forgive, if you want to stop being the stumbling block of others, like verse 1 and 2 says, it's going to take putting in more work than you're accustomed to doing. Forgiveness is overtime. Forgiveness is overtime. See, this session starts with getting tricked by others into thinking differently, thrown off from our original course. Next, it shows the worthlessness of distractive thinking. Then it rolls into forgiving the people who've tripped us up. And this is more for us than for them. You know, forgiveness frees us to fully believe. And I just saw a documentary. They're talking about the Olympics. So they go back to Nancy Kerrigan. And when you think about Nancy Kerrigan, who else do you always think of? Tonya Harding, who maybe or maybe didn't have her kneecapped. You know, somebody came up and hit her with a club and hurt her leg so that Tonya could go to the Olympics. Well, she got banned from the Olympics. And she still swears that it wasn't her fault. She didn't plan any of that. It was just her boyfriend and his friends that did it. And the wild thing is Nancy Kerrigan, when they interview her, you know, she doesn't like to be tied to that. She basically has just let that go. And she moved on with her life. You know, and she made, and with that, she's made millions of dollars because of that incident and also because of not being negative towards Tonya Harding. That's sort of an example of forgiveness. Maybe she didn't say it, but she lives like that. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. said, forgiveness is not an occasional act. It's a permanent attitude. Everybody knows this, who's a spiritually minded person. But it's hard to do, folks, when you've been burned by somebody. And the more we hang on to that fire, the more you hang on to that fire, the more you get burned. I mean, bitterness or being unforgiving is like drinking poison, hoping it's going to kill your enemy. That's sort of a weird thought. You're just hurting yourself. It stops you from believing. It stops you in your tracks. It keeps us from being the people we're really designed to be. Why am I teaching this? I was teaching the simplicity of believing because you can't get to the next level of believing unless you learn how to forgive yourself and forgive others. You got to just let it go. Forget about it, as they say in New Jersey. Just forget about it. You know, Jesus tells them they're either believing or they're not. It's either on or off. Just a speck is all you need. It's just flick, flick. So what gets you to the point you can flick on the lights is you have to have a focal point. What's your focal point? You have to have a composition. How have you arranged your life so that you can turn the lights on? You know, and then the effect. What is the effect of what you're trying to produce? What's the art of your heart? I mean, that's it. You know, if we believe, we can cast a mountain to the sea. And here it uses the example of a tree. Another two times, Jesus talks about throwing a mountain into the sea. If you shall say to this mountain, be thou removed and be thou cast into the sea, and don't doubt in your heart, It's going to happen, right? Well, here he used another example because there probably wasn't a mountain nearby, because he used physical examples. We could point to Pikes Peak. Now, they can hardly move some of the boulders that roll off of that thing, much less move a whole mountain. But that's how big believing is. A speck could move a mountain. It's either on or off. What mountain do you need to move? You gotta forgive yourself. Gotta forgive other people. It doesn't mean that you have to accept their stupid behavior. You just gotta let it go. People usually do later. I knew a woman who had been horribly abused her whole childhood by her grandfather. And on his deathbed, she went and she told him she forgave him. And I thought, what a fool. How the heck could she, because she told me all the stories for years of what happened to her. And it was, they couldn't even show it on TV or a movie. It was so horrible. And then she forgave her whole family. Her mother allowed this to happen. Just turned a blind eye, acted like she didn't see, because she didn't want to take it anymore. And she forgave this man. Pretty wild. I know a great example that I've seen recently is Josephine. Mother was aging. Her house was paid off in New Jersey, worth a lot of money. And Josephine's father died, passed away, and then her mom was lonely. And a couple of years out, maybe not even that long, this guy named Al came along. And Al was a smooth dancing, smooth talking, old Italian guy. He was fit and trim and loved to dance, and her mom liked to dance, so they'd go to the senior center and do their afternoon dances. But he basically milked her out of $160,000. He got her to remortgage her house and give him the money, and it just disappeared. But then one day she fell down on the ice and got hurt, and he must have had a conscience attack. And he went and told Josephine's brother, "I need to tell you what I did." And then he said, "I'm sorry, and I'll pay you back." Well, he paid us back, and he just recently died. But for a few years, he was trying to pay back what he did. And Josephine said, "I forgave him a long time ago." And again, I didn't understand forgiveness, I guess, because I thought, you're crazy, Josephine. Why would you ever forgive somebody who stole your inheritance and who hurt your mom like that? But then I realized she understood forgiveness better than I. He asked to be forgiven. He made all the steps toward making it right, didn't he? Yet I still didn't want to forgive him. That's not what the word says. He asked for it, and he even tried to make recompense. It's pretty big. I have ultimate respect for the guy, because I've never met anybody who ever really said they're sorry and wanted to pay somebody back, unless the law told them they had to. He just wanted to do right, finally. So it's wild. Ultimately, we either believe or we don't. But it's a releasing. You think it helped this guy? Sure it did. Either we believe or we don't. It's a composition of our hearts that sets us up to believe or not, that turns on the yes or the no. Finally, Jesus uses the example of a household servant and his employer. And if we just do the bare minimum, we're going to receive just a bare minimum. If you don't change something in your life, is anything going to change? No, it can't. It can't. See, forgiveness helps compose the picture by eliminating the distractions so we can believe and do what God's called us to do. See, in psychology, every psychologist has to understand this, and they'll work with people who have this, who've been abused or who've been hurt in the past, and they work with them on this. I just went to Psychology Today, and an article from 1 year ago, it talks about forgiveness is an important action that can lead to a place of greater healing and peace. This is not a preacher. This is a psychiatrist saying this. It leads to a place of greater healing and peace. Forgiveness and letting go of anger and resentment has even shown to benefit a person's physical health. Studies show that forgiveness can bring about lower stress hormones, strengthen the immune system, lower blood pressure, and reduce gastrointestinal and other body pains. However, we all know forgiveness doesn't come easily. And Frederick Luskin, PhD, director of Stanford University Forgiveness Project, has outlined 9 steps to take when embarking on a path to forgiveness. While difficult, taking these steps promise to bring about greater understanding, awareness, and can equip an individual with the tools necessary to forgive and move on. See, believing is moving on. It's doing something to get somewhere, to get something that we want. Like Michelangelo had to carve out, he had to take away the junk to get to the masterpiece. He was able to see in that block the David that he drew on paper, and then make it, he was an expert with the human body. So I'm not going to take the time to read these 9 steps to forgiveness just for time's sake. But I mean, just a real quick point at it is, talk to understand how you feel and talk to a couple of trusted people about your experience. Trusted is a key word there. Make a commitment to yourself on what you have to do. That's number 2. Number 3, forgiveness is for you and not for anyone else. Number 4, get the right perspective on what's happening. Recognize that your primary distress is coming from hurt feelings, thoughts, and physical upset, not what offended you or hurt you 2 minutes or 10 years ago. Forgiveness helps to heal those hurt feelings. I mean, to keep something alive that happened so long ago is a little bit insane. It's sort of a continued insanity to be unforgiving. Do something. At the moment you feel upset, practice some stress management, which I'm not going to go into. There's things that you can do. We've talked about those the last few Sundays. It's putting the right thoughts in our heads. Give up expecting things from other people or your life that do not choose to give you. Don't expect someone else to say they're sorry to you. You can expect it, but most people aren't going to do it. So let it go. 7, put energy into looking for another way to get your positive goals met than to re-experience this hurt. Doesn't do you any good. It holds us back. Number 8, remember that a life well lived is your best revenge. A life well lived is your best revenge. And the last one, amend your grievance story to remind you of your heroic choice to forgive. You can make your life whatever you want. Amend your story. Write a new chapter to your life. Work on that painting a little bit. By following these steps to forgiveness, you can reduce your negative feelings and give yourself the benefit of happiness and well-being. I ran away when I was a kid, when I was 16, and I stayed gone for a year. And I was a senior in high school. So I quit high school as a senior and went running around in Texas, just freer than a jaybird, and getting into any kind of trouble that I could possibly get into. And then that year, when I was 17, a year later, I turned on to God. And I realized that where I was heading wasn't the direction I really wanted to go with my life. So in the middle of the night, I went home. The door was always open at our house. They never locked it. There's too many kids and people going in and out. We had 6 kids, a grandma, and then strays that lived with us. And so I went in, and the next day at the supper table, they had set a place for me. Nobody asked me where I was or what I'd done or why did you do this to me. They just set a place at the table. That's forgiveness. I'm sure it wasn't easy for my mother or stepdad to do. Because they got hurt through that experience. Imagine your child disappearing for a year and then just reappearing. It's forgiveness, folks. You got to live it and love it. Is the point of this teaching, is it believing or is it forgiveness or is it both? It's both. But the real focus, where believing takes you to, the real pinnacle of this, the mountaintop, is really living a lifestyle of forgiveness. And that's the point, and that it's hard work to get there. You have to work. Like Josephine said, a good picture makes me want to jump into the scene. It makes me want to be there. I want to go in and look around. That's how our life should be. People should want to jump in and look around. You're the artist of your own heart. Compose your believing images free of distractions and bitterness, and you'll be able to jump into the scene of your choosing. What you see is what you get. Like Michelangelo, see the finished masterpiece and start chipping away at any unneeded material. Just get rid of it. When he was building, after he finished that and they erected that statue where they wanted it, the mayor of the town said, "I don't like his nose." Told this. I know like the nose. and it's a little too fat. And so Michelangelo grabbed a handful of marble dust that was laying around the base, and he climbs up this statue, and then he acts like he's doing something, and he starts dripping the dust down. And then he got down and he said, "How do you like it now?" He goes, "Perfecto." He didn't do anything. Just the guy wanted him to do more than he contracted him to do. Do more than you think you can do, and you get somewhere. Just like art invites us to participate in the subject of the artist, believing invites us to participate in our own life. Forgiveness composes the setting so we can focus on the subject and feel the artist's intent. The art of forgiveness will help us believe. God bless.